Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast with Michael Becker and Paul Peebles. During this program, you will hear interviews with real-life successful investors who will share their stories and provide useful advice on how to acquire, finance, and operate apartment complexes. Now, here they are, Mike Becker and Paul Peebles.
Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Peebles, National Underwriter for Old Capital. And with me today, as always, Michael Becker.
Hey, Paul.
Michael, also with Old Capital. I love to save money.
Everyone knows that, yeah?
So, being a banker, I think it's important to save money, especially the bottom line. And I think we have a great guest in the Old Capital Podcast today. And I know that, Michael, she has worked with you on a number of your transactions. And I thought we'd kind of share her money-saving background with the audience today. So I'm going to have you introduce Katie Anderson.
Yeah. So with us today, we have Katie Anderson from Save Water Company out of Houston, Texas. And Katie's actually done water conservation on 7 or 8 of my properties now. Done a great job. So Katie, how are you?
Doing great. Thank you for having me.
Good. I thought maybe we start out today with a little bit of background on yourself and tell us a little bit about you and how you got into toilets.
Yeah, that's right. I'm now the toilet expert, and I often wonder how I ended up being a toilet expert, but that's where I ended up. So I have a background in biomedical science and then shifted gears to real estate out of college, and I was a commercial real estate appraiser for several years, which has really helped in my understanding of conservation and how it can affect the value of an asset and how important that is to apartment owners. So been able to kind of marry all that together and been in the industry for about 5 years. And Save Water Co. is just over a year and a half old itself.
That's great. That's great. So what is water conservation? So I'm an apartment owner, aspiring apartment owner. What is water conservation? Why is it so important to us?
Great question. So for us, when we look at water conservation, we first want to run a water audit. And what's important in a water audit is, one, your utility rate structure. So if you're located in the city of Dallas versus Fort Worth, Dallas has higher rates per gallons used versus Fort Worth, which has lower. So you might look at your Fort Worth water bill and think it doesn't seem very high, but that doesn't mean that there isn't an opportunity for water conservation. It's just that the utility rates are actually lower. So we say that any property, if you run numbers on it for yourself, anything above $40 per occupied unit is likely a good candidate, meaning that if you do conservation, you're going to have a great ROI. It can be as quick as 6 months and sometimes into the 24-month range. So our average is probably 6 to 12 months.
On full payback on the cost
on
of the
full
service.
payback on conservation services.
So when you get a water conservation, is it always the same thing that you're doing, or do you do different methods along the way?
We do different methods. It's actually very property dependent, though there's some general things that we do or look at on each property. But after we do a water audit and basically determining how many gallons are being used on a per occupied unit basis, marrying that to the water utility rate structure to understand dollars, if it looks like a good candidate, meaning that the ROI to the investor or the owner is good, then we'll do an on-site property inspection. That's me going into several units. I want to flush your toilets. I want to look at your shower heads. I want to look at anything on this property that's using water internally inside your units.
So what kind of program? So you say you'll go do an audit. So what would be the different options that you might have when you go look at a property?
Right. So after doing the on-site inspection, based on what I see there, we sort of approach conservation in 2 separate ways. One, can I rebuild what's already there and save water that also gives a great ROI? Or 2, should I rebuild some of what is there and also replace some of what is there? So depending on the property, we'll approach it in those 2 different ways. When I say rebuild and replace, rebuild means that I'm going to replace all showers and aerators and rebuild the existing toilets and fix all drips and leaks and of that nature. The other is doing all of that, but then instead of rebuilding the toilet, we'll actually replace it with a high efficiency one.
Now, most of these properties that you're looking at were built in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and 80s, and sometimes the 90s. So these properties typically is where the landlord is paying the majority of the expense for water. So if you can save 10, 15, 20% bottom line, that's a significant savings. I would think that water is almost like cash. Every time you flush, it goes right down.
Yes, there are quite a few puns that go along with what you just said, but yes, exactly. That's how we view it.
Talk a little bit about like Hearst as an example. Hearst has a flat rate fee, whether you flush the toilet or not. Tell us a little bit about what that means and some of the different pricing for some of the different areas.
That's great. So if I had an ownership group and I was looking at a property, or I already had a portfolio of properties, the first thing I would look at if I were thinking about doing a water conservation program is the utility rate structure. You have to understand how many gallons I save and what that equals to you in dollars. So Hearst is a great example. Hearst has very high base fees, which means that you as an owner, if you own a property in Hearst, you can consume 0 gallons of water and the city is still going to charge you a flat fee per unit, no matter what. So if you wanted to implement conservation on a property that's located in Hearst, you might save 50% consumption, but that will only equal you 25% dollar savings. And so an owner needs to understand that, and that ties straight into your ROI, how fast you're going to get your money back for implementing a conservation program. And each city is completely different. So Fort Worth has lower fee rates, which means that your payback is going to be a little longer than, say, a property in Dallas or even a property in Garland.
So what we talked a lot about it. So we're going to come in, and what would be a typical results range? So we're going to hire your company, come in and do it. What would be you said it's a 6 to 24 month payback is pretty typical, but what is that like in dollars and percentages?
Yeah, sure. So if we did just straight baseline, which means that we're just going to rebuild what's already there, not replacing anything, you can anticipate anywhere from 30 to even sometimes 45% savings off your water bill. Depending on the utility rate structure it's located in, you can pretty much anticipate anywhere from $10 to $20 per occupied unit decrease from that type of effort. If we did the baseline plus also replacing the toilets, you can anticipate anywhere from 45 to 65% consumption on your water bill savings, and that would typically equal around the $35 a unit mark. Just depending on the rate structure, it can be better or worse.
So if we're saving $20 a unit and we got 250 units or so, we're talking almost $5,000 a month. Or
That's right. I like to talk about a home run deal we did in South Dallas to give this example of how significant it can be. So this property is just over 300 units, South Dallas, probably C-class property.
Maybe a D.
Maybe a D. Yeah, exactly. One of my workers sent me a video of while we were on that property standing at the kitchen sink, and there was water coming out of the cabinet above her. She looked at the tenant and said, "Ma'am, did you know that there's water coming out of the cabinet above you?" And the tenant said, "Oh yeah, that happens all the time." So we were glad to actually get on that property because we took the consumption per month from 5.6 million gallons to 2.2 million gallons.
Oh, wow.
So we were saving 3.4 million gallons, which is about a 64% savings opportunity. And that particular water bill went from the $27,000 a month to about $15,000.
Wow.
So we're saving about $10,000 a month.
So about $120 a year. So, if you put an A cap on that, that's like 12 to 1 for every dollar you save.
And that's right. And what's really great about conservation is that it's the quickest, immediate payback. So once you do conservation, your very next water bill will decrease that much.
Is that what you do, Mike? You have Katie come in immediately?
Yeah. I prefer to have it like day one, but sometimes we have to have a little bit of lead time.
Laugh with Mike because when he tries to pre-prep me even through the acquisition phase so that if closing happens on a Monday, my team is on his property on Tuesday.
Yeah. That Katie's become a member of my team per se, and we're out there doing due diligence. The day we're walking units, I always make sure that they're out there that day doing the audit, getting our copy of the bills. So when we're preparing our underwriting and our pro forma, that's something we certainly want a pro forma to be as accurate as we can. So I always try to have her out there and be part of the team and help us with our underwriting and our budget going forward. So that is certainly something that we've implemented over the years of doing this.
We invite ownership groups to reach out to us even when they're looking at deals. So maybe they don't even own it yet, but they're looking at one and they're trying to understand what kind of improvements can we do to this property to increase the value. So they'll bring us in, we'll do an audit for them, give them back their savings opportunity so that they can estimate that.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point because everybody talks about trying to increase the revenue, the top line piece, but they always forget the bottom line piece and how much of an impact that has. So I think that's unbelievable.
We've done so many deals for Mike now and had great savings on all of them. So when Mike looks at a property if he takes our average savings on his assets, which might be 35, 40%, and then a new property he's looking at, say, well, Katie's done this for me on all my other properties, she should be able to save 35, 40% on this one, and starts calculating the dollars that way, it can get him into trouble if he's basing it on that ROI only because of the utility rate structure. So if he were looking at a property in Hearst, remember, if you save 40% consumption, that might only equal 20% in dollars.
Yeah, one of the other things that certainly isn't true in all cases, but we've been tied on a few deals we've been looking at, and our lender actually allowed us to reduce historical water rates, water expense when we're sizing up a loan, which helped us get more loan dollars because we had one of her audit reports, and we've successfully done multiple projects with this lender in the past. So don't want to promise that out there to everybody, but it's actually helped us get more loan dollars on the front of this deal too. So I'm a big believer on it. What do you look for in the future here? We're obviously in an environment where water is increasingly scarce. So do we anticipate a bunch of water rate increases or flat, or what do you kind of see?
You can definitely anticipate water rate increases. And we're going to say just on average, you can anticipate 5 to 7% per year over the next 5 years, guaranteed in pretty much every single utility system. Some of them are even doing 2 rate bumps a year. So not even 1, 2. Water has been an undercharged commodity our entire lives, and that's going to catch up very fast. So it's something that ownership groups need to pay attention to, and especially if they're holding this asset over the next 3 years, just because your water budget is $100,000 this year, anticipate it being $107,000 the next year just due to rate increases, even if you consume the exact same amount of water.
That's starting to add up. So, we always try to ask everybody maybe some funny stories or anything interesting. I'm sure you walked into, you say you did 8,000 units in your career now. Maybe some interesting things you've seen when you walk into units. Don't name any names, but maybe something semi-G rated.
Yeah. So, if you guys had a couple of hours to listen to me, I have plenty of stories to share. But one of my favorites is one of my crew members went into a unit, and as he walked in, he noticed a rooster statue that was sort of right next to the door. So he walks around to the kitchen to start working on the kitchen, and he hears this noise, and he turns to his left, and that rooster statue had moved because it was about 1.5 feet from his foot. So he realized that this place took free-range chicken to a new level, which I guess was pretty genius. If he wanted eggs in the morning, he had them fresh right there in the unit. So
organic, huh?
That's right. That's exactly right.
Another thing that I want to kind of touch upon is replacement of the toilets and the bowl versus the floaters and all these things. We have leaky toilets that are out there, but talk a little bit about the expensive toilets versus the mid-cost or low-cost toilets in the property. Even though it says 1.8 gallons of a flush, is it 1.8? Is it 2? Is it 3? Because once that's like a percentage of $1. So once you start going up in the amount of water that flows out of these toilet bowls, it keeps getting more expensive with these toilet bowls.
Yeah, so I think one of the greatest things we stumbled upon was the misconception behind what the toilet is labeled as far as how many gallons it's using versus what it actually is using. So we've started measuring toilets, and we've measured over 3,000 toilets, and to this point, a 1.6 gallon per flush toilet on average is using 2.4 to 2.5 gallons every time it's flushed. We've even measured brand new toilets out of the box that are supposed to use 1.28 gallons and are actually using 2 gallons every time they flush. So what I say is, if you go to Home Depot and you see a 1.28 gallon per flush toilet for $100 and you see a 1.28 gallon per flush toilet for $300, your assumption is they somewhat look the same. They both use 1.28 gallons every time they flush. What do I care? Let's go for the $100 toilet. And that's the biggest misconception. When you go low brand, you go low quality, you might not be getting the product that you think you're buying. And so we try to bring a lot of knowledge and education to that realm as far as really understanding the brands and the types of toilets and how they might actually not be using what they say they are. So back in the day, the toilets used to be 5-gallon tank toilets. Mm-hmm. And the government came in and said, you guys need to do conservation. 5 gallons is too much water to flush waste, so you need to shrink your tanks. And the toilet makers did just that. So they shrank the tank. The challenge is, because the bowl determines how much water a toilet tank needs, the bowl is still engineered for the 5-gallon tank. So you have bowls that need 3.5 gallons, even though the tank might be 1.6 gallons, if the bowl needs 3, it's going to siphon the tank to give it 3 gallons, which is why you can't put anything inside of a tank to make it quote unquote use less water.
Like bricks and bags.
Bricks and bags, none of those things work. If the bowl needs 3 gallons, it's going to get 3 gallons. If you do anything to restrict the bowl from getting the gallons it needs to flush, it won't flush. That's where the double flushing comes into play.
So we talked a lot about toilets. What other are the common things that you run across? What's like the second killer of someone's water bill?
Second killer is what we call the silent killer that nobody even knows what to look for, and that's inside your shower. So if you go home tonight, you turn on your shower, and your shower head turns on, and you look down at your spout, and water is still coming out of your spout, that is a leak. And we measure those on these properties to be 1 gallon in 40 seconds. So if you can imagine taking a 10-minute shower, you've got a family of 4, wasting 1 gallon in 40 seconds, how much that water can add. So a lot of people and owners tend to focus on the toilet, though that's a huge saver. We find that the manifold's saving just as much. So we focus on both of those whenever we go onto properties.
What else do you look for? Do you focus sometimes on sprinkler heads too? Is that something that you guys do?
Yeah, what's interesting about irrigation, and this really goes into play of where water's headed, is we feel like irrigation's a dying thing. We really feel like irrigation will not even be allowed here in the future. So though we find that you absolutely can save money there, and everybody should be looking for sprinkler head leaks. Leaks are huge. It's not something that we necessarily focus on. When we're on the property, if we find something, we'll alert the owner and let him know, or we'll give some recommendations on his irrigation system, aka pull it out and let's put some rocks and cactus around everywhere. But other than that, we really try to focus on the inside of the units. We ask ourselves 2 things. One, how can we change the water use on this property without asking your tenants to change their behavior? And also we try to keep in mind who's fixing this product once we're gone. So the challenge with a lot of the toilets on the market today, if you get them to high tech, you'll get a maintenance guy in there who doesn't know where to find the parts. The parts are expensive. He doesn't know how to fix them. I would like to add, using anything lower than a 1.28 gallon per flush toilet on your property, you have to remember that these properties were built back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. They were engineered for having 3.5 gallons move through the piping system every time it's flushed. We have some studies that show if you go below a 1.28 gallon per flush toilet, you significantly increase your risk of backflow issues. So this particular study showed that 12 out of 15 times using anything lower than a 1.28 gallon toilet clogged the lines down the road. So it's an expense that you need to think about. Sure, you might be able to use less water per flush, and that might save you X dollars, but then you have to calculate what your risk is and if you have to do a backflow issue. Yeah,
definitely. So if someone wants to reach out to you, what's the best way to get a hold and some more information about you and your company?
Yeah, great. So my personal email is kanderson@savewaterco.com. And you can also visit our website at savewaterco.com. Our email or phone number is 832-786-1448.
Katie, can I throw out maybe a tagline
Sure.
for you? I'm thinking, when you take a pee, think of me.
It's perfect.
You can change that. I just throw that out
If
there.
people remember me with that, I'm 100% okay. I'm actually the toilet queen. I've been called that too, so it's okay.
Katie, we certainly appreciate you coming to the podcast today. We learned a lot of information. And again, the bottom line really is water is gold, or it's dollars that actually get pushed down the sink, as everybody knows. But it does have a direct impact on what your NOI is and what your rate of return is to your investors for distributions and valuation. So if you can't get a handle on what you're paying for on expenses on water, that's just maybe a little bit of an indication that you don't have a handle on the rest of your expenses throughout the property. This is an easy one to fix. It helps not only your economy, but it also helps the general people in and around the area for water usage. And we thoroughly recommend Katie and her company to help you. Anything else, Mike?
Yeah, just one of the things you made me think of is when we're out there implementing rent increases, one of the things we're doing or implementing RUBS is we're lowering the out-of-pocket cost of our tenants if we're billing back the water. So every dollar they don't have to pay in water bill, they can pay me in rent. So it certainly helps implementation of rent increases along the way too. So that's certainly something that I always think about when I'm doing it. So anyways, Katie, thank you so much for coming, and appreciate your time.
Thank you for listening to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. Please join us at oldcapitallending.com to sign up for our weekly email updates. We'll see you here next week with another great interview.